Welcome, folks, to our final installment of Progressivism. I am Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. Today, we are still talking about presidents, and today we're talking about Taft, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson. Now, one of the things I want you to know, Woodrow Wilson's not going to have as many slides as some of the others, but Woodrow Wilson comes back and gets more play when we get into World War I. So stay tuned for that. But first, let's talk about Taft. So what did he do? We talked about how he came to the presidency, and we talked about his bucking of heads with Roosevelt. But what did he do? So he did tackle the tariff. He did encourage reformers to fight for lower rates, but he ended up cutting deals with conservative leaders that actually kept tariff rates pretty high, and it was too high for most of the reform to happen. He was big on antitrust, similar to Roosevelt. He did launch 90 antitrust suits, so that's a big deal. He did that. He considered himself a progressive, and he decided that judges should be used. The law as a scientific device should be used by judges to solve society's problems. So he really believed in all three branches. So there's some big ideas from him. He pursued this idea of dollar diplomacy, which basically, if you enhance the economic development of Latin America and Asia, you'll wind up actually creating markets for yourself. So he encouraged American investment in the infrastructure of those countries. We'll talk about imperialism in another unit, American imperialism, and unfortunately, this was part of that. It was very successful for the American economy, not as great for Latin America and Asia, but we'll get to that. He believed in the idea of world peace, and that if we could negotiate treaties and use arbitration, then we could, avoid war. Okay. In 1910 and 1911, he was able to get through some important arbitration treaties that he had arranged with France and Britain. So he did accomplish some important stuff. He was known as one of the foremost advocates of world peace and arbitration. He signed a law to make Mexico and Arizona states, so they became states finally, Yenas. In 1909, he did lower the tariff rate ever so slightly, and this is more information about dollar diplomacy, and there's an example there for you to check out. He also continues to enforce antitrust laws, built the Panama Canal, which was big for trade, settled a number of international disputes, really tried to obtain world peace, didn't quite get there, but really, made a valiant effort, and maintained a policy of neutrality toward Mexico. Now his failures. So he wasn't able to obtain Canadian reciprocity, so that was kind of a bummer. He was unable to follow a lot of the Roosevelt policies, and that led to a split of the party, which is what allowed Woodrow Wilson to get elected. He alienated some members of his administration by not following some of Roosevelt's policies, so that was a problem. He didn't treat the people who disagree with him all that well, so the split in the Republican Party would result in his demise. There was earning of profits for American business in exchange for political and economic stability or peace. So there was this juxtaposition. You could have one or the other. Didn't strengthen the military at all, which would prove problematic when World War I hit, but we'll get to that when we talk about World War I. And he refused to do anything for Black Americans or to grant independence to the Philippines. So those were his failures. He was inconsistent. So on some things he was great, and other things not so much. So you really couldn't. He was inconsistent. That's the perfect word for it. I'm trying to find another word, but that's the word right there. He was inconsistent. He was trusted by Roosevelt, which is why Roosevelt named him his successor to continue the policies, but he later challenged him and then became his rival. He called himself a progressive, but ultimately he sided with conservatives, with people who weren't so progressive. So he was inconsistent in application of his philosophy. Now let's go to Woodrow Wilson. So he ran as a progressive Democrat on the coattails of Bryan. Bryan was very popular. We'll talk about him more in another video, because William Jennings Bryan is important. We'll talk more about him later. Woodrow Wilson was progressive. He was an academic. We talked a little bit about him before. He was governor. He ran Princeton. He was a professor. So, and So that's the basic breakdown of Wilson. He only won because the Republican vote was split. He won with 42% of the popular vote, and he got himself a Democratic Congress, which was how he was able to do what he did. So what were the big things that he did? He did the Federal Reserve, which was a very big deal, gave us a national bank regulating our currency. Federal Reserve has a big role to play today. So anybody who's familiar with government, you would know about the Federal Reserve. Got through the Clayton Antitrust Act. We lowered tariffs. And of course, there's more to come from Wilson in World War I. And that, folks, ends part 4. I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you in the next video.